Your marriage shouldn't leave you feeling constantly stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, lonely, resentful, and burned out. That's not why we get into our relationships. Obviously, that stuff creeps in from time to time, but if you're feeling constantly burned out, there's a problem. And so in today's episode, we're going to talk about where burnout comes from and maybe give you some ideas about what you can do about it. Stay tuned. There are a lot of people feeling burned out right now. So if you're feeling burned out, you're not alone. I got a message from a woman just yesterday, I think it was, and she was just like, man, I just don't know how I can keep doing this. She was talking about how her partner seems to be kind of checked out. She feels so lonely. It's been a while since they connected and had a meaningful conversation. She feels like they're more strangers than anything. The responsibilities that are on her shoulders are just exhausting her. She's constantly tired and grumpy. And I was just like, oh man, I hear it. I hear it because I've been tired and grumpy. And there have been many moments in my relationship where I feel burned out. And I talk to people who are feeling burned out in their relationship all the time. And so if you're there right now, this episode is for you. Or if you want to have the tools to recognize where burnout's coming from and what to do about it, if it does ever creep into your relationship, this episode is also for you. Now, in my experience, I've noticed that burnout typically comes from three different sources. The first source is something that I talked about on a recent episode. I talked about the foundation of friendship that your relationship is built on and that your communication is built on. That foundation consists of three pillars. I know you, I like you, and I have your back. And if you feel like your partner is a stranger to you, if you feel like you're living parallel lives that occasionally intersect when you have to take care of a common issue or tackle the bills or a problem that arises, but otherwise you're kind of not really connecting with each other, you're not having fun together, you're not making memories, you're not flirting, you're not laughing, there's not a whole lot of like joy and playfulness in your relationship, that wears on you over time. The second pillar is I like you. If you don't like your partner, if you're not going on dates, if you're not having that shared laughter I just mentioned, if you just kind of can't really tolerate your partner's presence for very long before you get annoyed, that's a problem. And obviously that's going to wear on you over time. And if there's a severe lack of trust, if you can't count on your partner to be there for you when you need them, it's going to weigh on you. And I think that any person in their right mind, if they're in a relationship that constantly drains them of their energy and sucks their time and their attention away from them and doesn't return much, you get burned out. It doesn't make sense to invest into a giant black hole that only takes and never gives back. And so that is one reason for burnout, is that your foundation of friendship is weak and your relationship feels like it's just a drain on everything that is good about you. It doesn't contribute very much positive stuff to your life. Get stuck in a relationship like that, you're going to get burned out, and eventually that burnout is going to turn into something ugly and messy. The second thing that typically causes people burnout is poorly defined or poorly enforced boundaries. Now, there's a lot of people who talk about boundaries. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but there's not a whole lot of really great definitions of what a boundary is and kind of how it operates. So I want to give you a quick example, an analogy that might prove helpful. At least it's helped me. So I like to think of your boundaries in your life as a fence that goes around your house, a fence that goes around your yard. This fence serves multiple purposes, and I'll talk about them throughout the next couple of minutes here. But the first, and I think the most important one, is that it tells everybody around you what's yours and what's not yours. Everything inside the fence is yours. It's your responsibility. It's your possessions, and everything outside that fence is not your responsibility. It's somebody else's. And that's one big purpose for boundaries. If you think, we'll take the analogy to your marriage, I think a lot of the times people get burned out because they start taking responsibility for things that are not theirs to be responsible for, and it gets exhausting. Or they allow things that they are responsible for to be taken over by somebody else, which makes you feel like a prisoner. It can make you feel smothered or overwhelmed. A decent analogy, if we go back to the house, is like, let's say your neighbor, their grass starts to die. And you're like, well, that looks ugly. That is going to lower my property value. So maybe I can help them out a little bit. And you start watering their lawn over the fence to get it nice and green and lush again. And it works. the lawn starts growing again. It becomes more green and more vibrant and it looks better. And that's great for a little while. You kind of pat yourself on the back because you solved a problem. But then what starts to happen is that your neighbor starts to realize or learn that they don't have to take care of their yard, because if they neglect it, you will step in and take care of it for them. And it becomes an expectation from them. And then you start to resent that expectation. You start to think, why am I the one who has to take care of your yard? This is your yard. I did this to you as a favor early on, or because I didn't like it, but now I'm stuck doing it full time if I don't want this nasty dead grass next to my house. And before you know it, you're watering the entire neighborhood's lawn. And it can be exhausting and super, super draining. Another reason that you have a fence around your house is to protect the things that are most important to you. You want to let the good things in and you want to keep the bad things out. Still to this day, like one of the most annoying things that can happen is you're in the middle of a family dinner, everybody's gathered around the table, dinner just came out of the oven, and you hear a knock, knock, knock on the door, or your phone rings and you go answer the door and it's a salesman and they want to just tell you about this new product. They launch right into their pitch and you try and cut them off and tell them we're in the middle of dinner and they just steamroll over your conversation. It's so frustrating. Or this is really common in my neighborhood right now, walking outside and stepping in somebody else's dog's poop. So frustrating. Not cool. Letting your dog poop in somebody else's yard. That's just a really obnoxious thing to do. Your fence is meant to keep those bad things out while letting in the good things, like the mailman, your neighbors or your friends or your family members who want to come pay you a visit for Christmas. And so taking that metaphor back to your relationship, what are the things that you're letting in, that you're saying yes to, that you shouldn't be saying yes to? And what are the things that you should be making a more vigilant effort to keep out of your space? And maybe there are some good things that are trying to get in that you're not letting in. Maybe you have some destructive thoughts or beliefs that are keeping really good things out of your life as well. So that fence should be permeable. Your boundaries should be permeable and let in the good things and keep out the bad things. So some signs that you might have some boundary problems in your life are if you're constantly feeling like everybody else is making demands on your time. You don't have time to do anything for yourself. You don't have time to do anything for your relationship because you have to take care of everybody's everything. There's expectations that you're going to help take so-and-so to practice, that you're going to help people take care of schoolwork, that you always say yes to your boss or your church. Whenever something comes your way, you say yes to it. And then the most important things to you take a back seat to the most urgent things. And if you feel like you're in a constant state of distress and you're constantly running around taking care of things that are urgent instead of taking care of things that are important, and if the things that are most important to you are not being protected, like your time, your energy, your sleep, your money, your relationships, then you probably have a boundary issue. And your burnout is coming from a place of you not having the confidence or the skills to say no to things that are not as important to you as the things that are most important to you, or not being able to say no to things that might interfere with the things that are most important to you. So that's the second reason that people typically get burned out, is they aren't great at setting and maintaining boundaries. The third reason that people get burned out is one that we don't talk about very often, but I think it's really important. You're not living in alignment with your core values. So core values are different than things that you value. Everybody values a lot of things. We value generosity, we value service, we value kindness, we value our family, we value having a job, we value having a roof over our head. There's a lot of things that you can put value on, but your core values are different than things that you value. Your core values are the beliefs, the character traits that comprise who you are as a person. They kind of make up your conscience. They're at the root of your deepest held beliefs. They help you make big decisions, and they help you find purpose in life. And oftentimes, and most times, when I talk to people about core values, they can't name their core values. Most people can name things that they value, but they can't name their core values. Brené Brown, in her book, Dare to Lead, says that you can't live a value that you can't name. And so it's really important to have clarity around what your core values are. Because if you aren't living in alignment with those core values, you start to lose touch with yourself. You start to behave in a way that goes counter to who you are as a person. You lose your identity. You lose touch with yourself, and you start to feel out of integrity with yourself. You start to feel lost, hopeless, confused, purposeless, and it can really, really eat at you over time. One of the biggest mistakes that I think I see people make is they allow a role to usurp their identity. A very, very common situation here, and I'm going to be a little gender normative because this is just what I've seen in my experience, but women who become mothers oftentimes allow the role of mother to consume their identity. And they throw all of their time and energy and purpose and their meaning, like who they are is the mother of these children. And it's a noble thing to raise children. It's admirable. But if you lose yourself in the process, what happens is when your kids stop needing you like they did when they were small and they become teenagers and then adults, you go through an identity crisis because your identity has been based on a role that you had in your life. And now that chapter of your book of life is coming to a close, you've lost touch with who you are. You forgot what your passions and interests were. Maybe you've lost friends along the way. You've just lost touch with yourself. I see the same thing happen a lot with men who spend their entire lives working in a career. And then when they go into the retirement phase, they freak out because their role has been a provider, or their role has been their job title, an electrician, a contractor, an engineer. And when they have to take that role hat off, they realize they've lost touch with who they are as a person. They're not in tune with their core values, and they go through an identity crisis. And when you lose touch with who you are, when you feel lost, when you feel a sense of like you're the foundation of what comprises you as a person and the things that are most valuable to you, you lose touch with that, it can be really, really difficult and send you for a loop. And it can send you into a space where you constantly feel burned out because you're not living in alignment with those core values. So those are the 3 reasons that I have found that most people get burned out. I think it's easy to blame your partner for maybe not pulling their weight, or it's easy to blame the circumstances of life. But in reality, you have a lot more control over whether or not you're feeling burned out than you may think. So I want you to think about the 3 things that I talked about today. The foundation of your friendship, is it solid and intact? If it's not, figure out which one of those 3 pillars. I know you, I like you, and I have your back. I've done a video on this if you want to learn more about it, but figure out which one of those 3 pillars is weak and start to strengthen it. And that should help with the burnout. And if it doesn't help, examine the boundaries issues. Are you feeling like people are constantly making demands on your time? Are you scared to say no to when somebody asks for help or needs something from you? If that's the case, you need to start focusing on developing and maintaining and enforcing boundaries in your life, learning to say no and learning to prioritize the things that are most important to you. And if you've gone through those 2 things and you're still feeling lost and resentful, I would get very curious about whether or not you know what your core values are. And if you do, examine your life and figure out what choices am I making that are going counter to those core values? How am I not acting in alignment with myself, with my character, with who I am as a person? And as you start to change those behaviors and align your actions and your words with your core values, you're going to find that pretty much every reason that you have to feel burned out will disappear. That is my hope for you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I've got another one coming up next week. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I think you'd really enjoy a previous conversation that I had about the 3 pillars of friendship that kind of create the foundation of your relationship and the foundation for impeccable communication. And you can find that right here. Once again, I just want to thank you for tuning in. If your marriage is something that's important to you, I want you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. My mission is to rid the world of mediocre love. And if you don't want a mediocre relationship, my goal here on this channel is to give you all the tools and resources you need to have one that's extraordinary. So if that sounds good to you, make sure you hit the little subscribe button. The little bell is great too, because that'll notify you when I post a new episode every week. And I'd really love to spend more time with you and help you on this journey to creating a ridiculously awesome relationship. Thanks.